Hello, this is Aaron Wissner of Local Future. I'm here live on the line with Nicole Foss. She's in New Zealand, and today is the 28th of September, 2020 for us, and in New Zealand, it's the 29th already. How are things going in New Zealand right now?
Pretty much back to normal. I mean, we only have a handful of cases and they're all known about in quarantine. So we're just living the same kind of life that we were living before all of this happened. And it's a brilliantly sunny day, but we are expecting a winter storm. So we might even get snow. And the children here are eagerly anticipating even the vague possibility of snow because they've never seen it in their whole lives.
Nice. Well, here in Michigan, it did rain today, end of September. It's still autumn, but it was a very nice temperature today. And for any viewer who hasn't watched before, first of all, Nicole has many, many videos. She's a futurist who talks about kind of more realistic what the future really is probably going to be like as far as the economy and energy and all those sorts of things. Not the techno future, you know, not that kind of, you know, sci-fi, Star Trek stuff, but like realistic stuff. And also not Mad Max stuff either. I mean, she's not really on that side of things either. At least I wouldn't put you on that side, should I?
No, I mean, I certainly do not want anything to do with that kind of future. I mean, if that kind of future turns out to be the case, there won't be a role for me in it anyway. So I just very much prefer not to think along those lines. It doesn't mean that it can't happen. Probably will happen in some places at some point. Hopefully not everywhere, and hopefully not anywhere near me. I just do not have what it takes to live in that kind of world.
So for the viewers, I just want you to know, first of all that Nicole is not from the United States. I mean, she was born, you were born, was it born in Canada and then moved?
I'm British.
Okay,
I'm a British-born Canadian Kiwi.
right. So you've got UK, England in there, you've got Canada in there, and you've got New Zealand in there. But never
Yep.
have you actually lived in the US, is that right?
Nope, but I've spent a lot of time there, and I've lectured in almost every state. There are only 6 states that I've never been to,
Nice.
so including Alaska and Hawaii. So I've been through almost all of the continental US, and I don't fly over it, I drive it. So I get to see every inch of it. And I found that absolutely fascinating because you get to see the cultural fault lines. You really do see the shifts in the way people see the world as you drive across the country. And I just found that absolutely fascinating to look at how the US isn't really one country in a way. It's multiple different cultures that all live within the same political boundaries. But I think what we're seeing now is the result of those cultures realizing that they're different. So before, I think that they almost didn't. For the longest time, well, there was a basic realization, but it didn't seem to really matter all that much in people's lives that other Americans were fundamentally different. All of a sudden, well, in the last decade, so before Trump, but getting there, people have started to realize, wait a minute, these people really do see the world quite differently than I do. And those cultural fault lines are getting a lot deeper. And
And
that, I think, is a problem.
before we go any deeper, I just want to give like a warning
Mhm.
to the viewer. Okay, so Nicole, she has been watching world news and especially US news quite intently for the past couple of decades and perhaps longer. And
I was
if
17.
if you are a supporter of the current president, Donald Trump, and if you're planning on voting for him or you're not sure how you're going to vote, then you might not like this episode because Nicole looks at things from the outsider perspective. And that means that she's kind of not getting all the same messaging as we're getting in the USA. And so her perspective is basically, well, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I would say, you know, something akin to, you know, Trump is the Antichrist or something like that. That maybe that's a little too harsh, but if hearing people talk about something like that might, you know, get your hackles up, then perhaps there's something else on YouTube that you might take a look at, because we want Nicole to be able to speak freely, but we also don't want, you know, people to be like, oh my gosh, all she talked about was that she's like this horrible Trump hater and whatever. Well, I don't think it's that she hates Trump. I think she just thinks he's soulless sociopath. And again, I don't want to put words in her mouth. So, so I asked Nicole to kind of catch us up on September 2020, because we're almost to the end of September. And I think her little segue about cultural fault lines in the U.S. kind of is a good introduction into what's been going on this month. So, Nicole, what has been going on in the world, but in the U.S. this month?
Primarily the U.S. I mean, there are other things that of note. Alexander Lukashenko stole another election in Belarus, and he's inviting Vladimir Putin to come in and help reform the Soviet Union. He's already been doing that in Ukraine. Now he's working on Belarus. So there are things happening in the rest of the world that are dodgy as well. But particularly of interest at the moment is the US election, because this is a make or break in so many different ways. Normally, when we approach a situation, I normally have a sense of which way it's going to go. So I can see all the things lined up on one side, I can see all the things lined up on the other side, and I can normally tell which of those is likely to win out at least, and be able to give a coherent explanation for why. This time, I cannot tell you who is going to come out of this on top. And the reason I can't is because of the utter chaos surrounding this election. It absolutely could go either way at this point.
And I want to interject that I've stopped listening to the polls because I don't know if they know what they're even talking about half the time as far as the polling goes. Like they might say, the Democrats are up, the Republicans are up, Biden or Trump or whatever. But it's like, I don't even know if there's anything reliable to listen to. So,
well, there is. The thing is, the polls are probably accurate, and if they are, and I believe they are, Trump is going to lose in a landslide. He is going to be completely and utterly wiped out politically if there's a free and fair election. The reason I can't tell you what comes out of this is it's not going to be a free and fair election. So we don't know the extent to which it won't be. We don't know the extent to which the cheating and the voter suppression will succeed. We don't know who will back Trump up the day after the election when he claims victory. So these are the unknowns, and there is no one at this point who could give you an answer to that question as to what comes after this. I can give you sort of ideas as to the kind of things that are going to happen, but what I can't tell you is how on earth it's going to resolve itself at the end of the day. So to look at the most likely scenarios for this election, it starts with things we've discussed before, that the interference with the post office. So Louis DeJoy was appointed to run the post office. He was actually appointed to destroy the post office, at least to the point where it wouldn't be able to conduct an election by mail. So they have removed post boxes all over the country, but only in blue areas. They've removed sorting machines from post offices in blue areas. They've dismantled them so they cannot be reassembled. There is now no way that the full functionality of the post office can be restored before the election. So this is going to cause a huge problem. People want to vote by mail because they don't want to vote in person during a pandemic. Chances are, if you vote by mail, the odds of your vote counting go down substantially. They're not zero, but they will go down substantially.
Now, wouldn't that depend on when you put the letter in the box? Because I just got my ballot today. So I could send it in today, and it would be sitting there in the township building, ready to go into the machine at the end of the voting on that day.
So the people's ballots have been delayed in arriving. Most people probably will get their ballot in time. It will need to get back there before the election, and it will take probably 10 times as long to do that as it normally would. So if you want to vote by mail, do it right now. Literally do not wait, because any time that you wait might mean that your vote doesn't get counted. You also have to put it into the special interior envelope. It won't be counted if you don't. It's a special sort of non-see-through kind of envelope. So you fill out your ballot, you put it in the inner envelope, you put the inner envelope in the outer envelope, and then you send it back. But you have to do it quickly, because there is a strategy that Trump has actually explicitly already told everybody about. This is not a mystery. I do not have to guess what this strategy is. He's already indicated exactly what he's going to do. He's going to declare victory the day after the election on the basis of in-person votes. Now, Republicans will be more likely to vote in person. They're the ones who think that the virus or the pandemic is a hoax, or they're not as concerned about it. He's been constantly telling them that the virus is nothing to worry about, that they're wimps if they wear masks and things like this. So there's going to be a problem with Republicans will vote on the day in far greater numbers than Democrats will. It's not that all Republicans will vote in person and all Democrats will vote by post, but more Republicans will vote in person, more Democrats will vote by post. It typically takes, well, it can take weeks to actually count all the postal votes. At least 5 states have legislation that prevents them from even starting the process of counting postal votes before the election day. So we know for a fact the votes will not be counted by the day after the election. Trump is going to declare victory anyway, and he's going to throw it to the Supreme Court, which he is currently trying to rig by putting in a nominee this close to an election. I mean,
now I'm confused about something there, Nicole, because 4 years ago, there was a vacancy on the Supreme Court, which the U.S. president at the time, Barack Obama, this vacancy had occurred like in March. And so he had put up a nominee to go into that position, and the opposition party, the Republican Party, said, no, we're not going to do that. And candidate Trump at the time, Donald, he said, no, whoever wins the election should be the one to choose. And so there was missing, a member from the Supreme Court all the way up until January, right? So now, Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away like a week or two ago, right? And so, but now, now it's the opposite situation, and now somehow they're going to install a person before the election when the election's less than 2 months away. I don't understand. How's that math work out? I mean, why
it doesn't.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
It's pure hypocrisy. And it's worse than that as well. So this is also an impeached president who has clearly committed an enormous number of crimes. It's not only a month before the election, it's a criminal appointing someone specifically to absolve him of his own crimes. There is no way that this should go forward. Absolutely no way.
So tell me a little bit about this candidate. I haven't even heard about this candidate. So I do understand that it's a female. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a female, so it's a female that's being put up there. I don't know anything about her background, her ethnicity, her politics, her age even. I mean, is she super young, so she's going to be like on the court forever or something?
Yes, she's 48.
So she's younger than us, both of them.
She's younger than us. She belongs to an extremist Catholic group. So they believe that women should take orders from their husbands. She believes that her religious beliefs should trump the law of the land. This is absolutely disqualifying for a judge. It won't make any difference. They'll push her through anyway. But if the law mattered for anything, there is no way that this person would have a seat on the Supreme Court, because she is on the record as saying that her religious beliefs will come before the law of the land in deciding cases. And these are religious beliefs that are only held by a minority of the population. This is to completely destroy the separation of church and state, which is absolutely critical. In the US, with the number of religions that people have, if you install an official religion and then oppress all the others, then that is just going to be an absolute disaster. But that's exactly where things are going. And that is going to have consequences.
So now where does she sit like on the continuum? Because as far as the Supreme Court goes, if you start from like the left, you've got Ginsburg and Sotomayor, Breyer, Kagan, something like that. And then there's like Roberts is kind of in the middle. I don't know. I don't know all the names of the current people, but then like Kavanaugh and Thomas were like really Republican or right leaning, I guess you could say. So
There's
where is she like on the
Alito,
continuum?
Alito and Thomas as well, and Gorsuch.
Right.
She will be, if anything, every bit as far right as Clarence Thomas, if not further right. I think it's quite likely that she will be the most far right justice on the Supreme Court. Although, considering that Clarence Thomas is there, she might not take that title, because Clarence Thomas is a far right extremist as well.
So who makes the decisions then if she's actually installed? You know, because there's like on a court of 9, there's always someone who's like that deciding vote. You've got 4-4 on a lot of cases. So now does that put like Alito in the middle? Like he's the one that, you know,
Roberts is in the middle.
Roberts is in the middle right now, right?
The Chief Justice, he has voted with the Liberals a few times. He's a conservative. I think he's voting with the Liberals to try and maintain the credibility and legitimacy of the court. So I think he might be stretching his own beliefs a bit, because maybe he does agree with them on the law in these particular instances. That is possible. But I also think it's possible that he cares very much about the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. And if it's constantly a question of, well, up to now 5-4 against the Liberals every single time, then people are not going to regard the Supreme Court as legitimate. So I think he's been trying to at least to some extent, vote with the Liberals in order to try and demonstrate some kind of balance. But with a 6-3 court, that won't matter anymore. There'll be nothing he can do. Every single decision is likely to go with the conservatives for possibly decades. So the likely response from the Democrats, if they were to win, would be to restore the balance on the Supreme Court by appointing additional justices, because there's nothing that says there has to be 9. So they can simply restore the balance by putting more justices on the court. They should certainly impeach Kavanaugh, because he clearly lied and his confirmation. He has clearly committed perjury. That is instantly disqualifying. He also has nowhere near the temperament for the judiciary. So I think based on his confirmation hearing, he should be removed immediately. He is not fit to serve as a justice of the Supreme Court. I would argue Amy Coney Barrett is not either, because she will not follow the rule of the law of the law of the land if it conflicts with her religious beliefs. And she won't recuse herself either. She will vote in accordance with her religion, even if it forces that religion down the throats of other people who do not share it. So I think both of them are hugely problematic on the Supreme Court. Clarence Thomas is, but he's been there for so long that there's nothing you can really do about that. His wife is busy trying to work with Trump to purge the civil service of anyone who doesn't actually support the MAGA movement. So he's extremely politically involved in ways that are highly inappropriate. But I don't think there's going to be much they can do to get rid of him. He's probably there for life, I would guess. But there are huge problems. And I think actually the legitimacy of the Supreme Court has already been fatally wounded. I don't think people accept the decisions of the Supreme Court as being fair and legitimate any longer, because so often they're not. I mean, you've got the Voting Rights Act and allow people to buy elections. The Supreme Court allowed all of that, and all of that completely goes against the Constitution. So it's already done everything it possibly could to enshrine minority rule, and a 6-3 court will maintain minority rule potentially for quite a long time. Now, I don't know who's going to win this because of the extent of the cheating. So I was starting to explain how the cheating was going to be working. So he's going to declare victory on November the 4th. He's going to try and throw it to the court to get them to back it, to get them to stop the vote count, to say, well, nothing else past this date will count. That's the same thing that happened with Bush and Gore, where they stopped the recount in Florida. And the Supreme Court gave the election to Bush, even although Gore would probably have won. So there is precedent for Supreme Court interference. The problem is that there will be a perception of fraud, because if there's a red wave on the night, because the Republicans all voted in person and the Democrats didn't, the Democrat votes will trickle in over time. he's going to tell his voters, look, they're stealing the election. See, we won on the election night, and now all these blue votes are coming in. This is all fraud. This is the mail fraud I told you about. So he's going to whip his supporters into an absolute frenzy. The question is, what do they do at that point? Well, for starters, they're going to intimidate voters at the polling booth before they even get a chance to vote. There used to be an act that prevented Republican thugs from hanging out at polling places to intimidate voters. That law has not been renewed, so they will do exactly that. That will reduce the vote in its own way. But even after the election, these people are not going to sit around if they think their savior, their messiah, is being removed from office in some deep state coup, which is exactly what he's been telling them is happening. They are armed. They are quite likely to conduct a purge of some kind. And this is enormously disturbing. So I've posted some interesting things on my Facebook page recently, posts from people who live in MAGA country, trying to explain the way their neighbors see the liberals. And what they're pointing out is that they don't just dislike the liberals, they hate them with the most passionate, sadistic hatred imaginable. They think they're completely weak. They hate weakness. This is what's coming down from Trump's pathology. Trump hates weakness. His entire life, he was told kindness is weakness, compassion is weakness, compromise is weakness. His own father forced him to just deny anything along that's the nice side of human nature. So he's of course been grown up as a complete sociopath, and this is the pathology that he's catching, that all his supporters are picking up on. So they hate weakness. They think all liberals are weak. If you wear a mask, you're weak. If you congregate in large numbers, you're weak. If you discuss community, you are weak. If you are weak, you do not deserve to live. This is their view. So this is a very serious situation. These people, some of them, not all of them by any means, they're not all equally as fervent in their beliefs. There are quite a lot of Trump supporters who are voting for him just because he pumps the stock market up all the time fraudulently, but they don't care that it's fraudulent as long as it benefits their 401k. So there are people who will vote for him knowing perfectly well he's an asshole, but he's just making them rich, so they'll vote anyway. But the MAGA people I'm thinking of are the people who literally think he's the second coming, and it would do anything for him, and truly and utterly despise liberals. This is going to be a huge problem. So they will probably overreact if he loses. If the court will not throw the election to him, they will overreact. The police have already backed him. The police unions have backed him. Most of the time, with all the protests that have been going on, the protesters and the police have obviously been opposite sides, but the police and the militias are on the same side. The police have been encouraging armed white supremacist militias to help them suppress protesters. They were encouraging the 17-year-old who shot 2 people in Wisconsin, for instance. And that the 17-year-old who shot 2 people now gets standing ovations at right-wing events. So this is absolutely being encouraged by law enforcement. It's quite likely the police will come out on the side of Trump as well. The question is, will the military? Because that's what matters. They have said they will not get involved on either side. So this is interesting because the military will follow the chain of command if there's even a fig leaf of legality to it. If there is a legal commander-in-chief, they will follow him. So some of the strategies he's employing, you can create a legal strategy for this. He could get the military to follow him that way. They won't necessarily do it, but they could. And this is why I can't tell you an answer, because I don't know what the military is going to do. He's done a lot to destroy the chain of command. So he's driven wedges between the top brass and the enlisted men. So on the basis, it's wall-to-wall Fox News. You are not allowed to change the channel. This is, of course, disinformation 24/7. So the enlisted men are being fed a chronic diet of disinformation. It's entirely possible that they believe that what Trump is saying, because that's all they hear. On Fox News, you don't hear the other side of the argument. So if all they're hearing is Trumpist propaganda on Fox News, then the enlisted men could well be on his side. The top brass mostly are not. They recognize what a threat he is. However, they are conservative, almost naturally. People in the military and law enforcement tend to be conservative. I don't mean extremist, but just naturally conservative. That tends to lead to wanting to enforce the rules. I don't know to what extent all of them understand exactly what kind of threat Trump is to the rule of law. Some of them probably think that socialism is the bigger threat. So they might choose Trump as the lesser of two evils, even although they know he's not a good person. They might think Biden is even worse. Again, I don't know. I'm speculating, but this is possible. So I think it's possible the military will be divided. It could be top brass against enlisted men. It could be just a complete mixture across the ranks. But I'm not convinced the military will stand as unified as you would normally expect them to. And even if they do stand unified, I'm not completely sure what side they will come down on. If Trump can construct a fig leaf of legality, they may support him anyway. They're not going to drag him out of the House if he refuses to leave. They're not going to intervene on either side. So they're not going to be the ones to make him go away if he's not going to leave. And he has said that he will not guarantee a peaceful transfer of power. He said the only way that he can lose this election is if it's fraudulent. So if he loses it, therefore he thinks it's fraudulent, therefore he will do everything he possibly can to force it through. And he says, well, there'll be a continuation of power anyway because I'm going to win. So, but he's not committing to a peaceful transfer of power at all. And it's not yet clear which side the military will come down on. That is going to be a big problem. So the ways that he could do this, if he declares that that he wins on November the 4th, he can get the Supreme Court to have a cutoff date for voting. That might mean that he wins anyway, or he could simply say, well, there's so much chaos, nobody gets to 270 seats in the Electoral College. We don't have enough confidence in this or that, or everything's just such a mess. We just have to have a vote in the House. This is in the Constitution, that if nobody gets to 270 votes in the Electoral College, it goes to the House, and every state delegation gets one vote. There are more Republican delegations than Democrat ones. He will win if he does this, and it will be legal in accordance with the Constitution. It will not be in the spirit of what the people are voting for, but that doesn't matter. The other issue is that state legislatures don't actually have to respect the popular vote in their state when they appoint electors. It's in the Constitution that they don't have to. They can decide how to appoint electors. Now, for a long time, they have deferred to the popular vote, but there's nothing that says they have to. Pennsylvania is already talking about appointing its own board of electors, no matter who wins the election in that state. So all the swing states, all 6 swing states have Republican legislatures. All 6 of them could completely ignore the popular vote and appoint a board of Trump electors that could give him the Electoral College. That would also be legal, and he would win. So it doesn't necessarily depend on voting, because the Electoral College system is extremely complicated. And it has all sorts of provisions that have never really been tested in practice. So we don't know how it's going to turn out. We don't know who will come down on what side. But there are a lot of bad actors in positions of extreme influence. So there's every reason to think that all kinds of machinations are going to be deployed. If they're successful, Trump is dictator for life. If they're not, he'll probably spend the rest of his life in jail, along with half his administration and most of his family. And those are 2 wildly distinct outcomes. But it's impossible to say at this point which one is going to come out on top. I think, on balance, if I had to grade it with probabilities, I think it's more likely that he's going to cheat and take it, because there are so many ways that he can try and do that. And when democracy is as broken as it currently is in the States, there are very few countries that have managed to come back from that and maintain democracy. So I think, on balance, despite the fact I think Trump is going to lose in a landslide on the basis of the votes, I think he's going to cheat, and I think on balance of probabilities, he's going to win. And I think that would be an absolute tragedy for the states. It really, really would. It basically means that all the assumptions people have built their lives on will be invalidated. You know, there won't be fairness. There won't be stable property rights. There'll be corruption absolutely everywhere. And if you look at the Soviet Union, that's sort of an indication of what mafia states look like. And I spent a lot of time in Soviet studies. This was my field as an academic. I was working on the military-industrial complex in the former Soviet Union, the nuclear industry, how those things tied together, the kinds of regulatory frameworks there were, the kinds of informal political influences, all the mafia stuff that had come out after the fall of the Soviet Union. All of this was my field. And I'm seeing the exact same things happening in the States right now. The exact same kind of collapse. There was another thing I posted just the other day, possibly even just yesterday on Facebook, looking at by a fellow from Sri Lanka, and he was saying what collapse looks like, and he was talking about his young adulthood in Colombo, Sri Lanka, and he would say, you know, one day he'd be posting something political, or there would be news about some horrendous atrocity, and the next day he'd be posting pictures of himself at a party. I'd be saying, collapse is something where random awful things are happening mostly to other people, but you keep living your life anyway until it happens to you. And most people don't think of it as collapse until it happens to them, until it affects them personally. But there are a lot of people who live in countries that have already been been through all of this. They are shouting from the rooftops as to where the US is going at the moment, that it is moving in the direction of autocracy, fascism, and particularly theocratic fascism, which is by far the most dangerous kind, because there's no arguing with that. I mean, you can perhaps have a rational argument with someone whose politics are just at the other extreme than yours. But once you add religion to that, rationality doesn't even matter anymore. It's gone. I mean, all that matters is dogma. And then you're in a very, very dangerous place. So I desperately hope that that Biden wins in a landslide and they manage to get rid of Trump. I desperately hope that. And it is possible that that will happen. That is a possibility. I just think it's not the highest possibility. But we absolutely have to keep fingers crossed for that possibility. The people who did the wargaming scenarios recently, I think that was a couple of weeks back, they looked at all these different scenarios and how things were likely to play out. The only scenario I think that didn't lead to immediate violence in the streets was a massive Biden victory. So that's really what we have to hope for. That's the only scenario that's not going to instantly lead to violence on a large scale. So, at least that was the outcome of the wargaming scenario. And I have every reason to believe that. I think that is true. So that is absolutely the outcome that we have to hope for. And people need to vote in overwhelming numbers, especially young people. Young people are going to have to live with this for the longest. And they tend not to vote. They tend not to think it affects them, or they think, well, if I vote, it won't change anything anyway. But if they vote collectively, it will change things. And they are the future, and they do deserve to have a voice in what that future is going to be. This is their opportunity to express that opinion. And it might be the very last one they ever get. In other words, if they don't vote this time, there may never be elections after this. There may never be an opportunity to truly express an opinion again, other than in the streets. So they really, really need to get out there and vote. I'm not telling anyone who to vote for, although I obviously have my opinions. I just want people to vote, because if you don't use the vote, you will lose it. And too many Americans are apathetic. They don't realize how much it matters to have a say in your government. Because if people don't care, then you get governments that are just absolutely rapacious kleptocracies. And no one's going to protect your rights if you don't do it yourselves as a population. I think there's this assumption that those rights are so baked in the cake, so guaranteed, that they could never be threatened. But they are threatened. They're threatened right now. all of them at once. This is an extremely disturbing situation to be looking at. And to be looking at it from the other side of the world, what other people are seeing is this is the mafia, a mafia coup of a nuclear power. And it's quite likely that that makes 3 for 3, because Russia is also a nuclear mafia state. And in fact, Israel is moving in that direction as well. China probably already is. You're looking at a situation where you're going to end up with all the nuclear weapons in the world in the hands of unstable extremists who are tied to organized crime. This is not a good scenario. It really isn't. I mean, Modi's India, for instance, as well. Modi is a fascist. He would like to genocide 200 million Muslims in his country. For instance, he's doing as much as he can to encourage that right now. He's encouraging people, Hindus, to go and beat up Muslims. He's saying that Muslims are spreading COVID in India. So he's saying, beat them up, burn down their houses, burn down their businesses, run them out of town. 200 million Muslims, and they've been living there for hundreds of years. These are not new migrants or anything like that. But there are extremely disturbing things happening there. India is a nuclear power too. Pakistan is as corrupt as they come on the face of the earth. It's a nuclear power. These are not nice things to think about, really, but we need to be aware of this. And I think America tends to see itself as kind of isolated in a way. Not that, like, the rest of the world doesn't really exist. It's only really on TV for entertainment somehow. And this is a huge problem, because what happens in the rest of the world does impact on America, and what America does impact on everybody else too. And we really are, in a way, a global village because of the level of integration that there is in the world at the moment. And so the idea that America is falling to a transnational crime syndicate masquerading as the government is very disturbing to the rest of the world. It's not just Americans who should be disturbed by this. It's absolutely everybody. And what we're finding is that the Trumpist propaganda is also spreading around the world. You're getting the rise of the far right in countries that have nothing to do with Trump. Because what you're getting is the propaganda, the QAnon propaganda particularly. QAnon is in 75 countries now, including New Zealand. We even have a QAnon political party here. It's composed of low information voters. These are people who've heard the propaganda but have no context for it because they're not connected to the news. They have no idea what's going on in the world and how it works. They got locked down. There are people who would normally be out and about doing all sorts of things in the real world. They got locked down. They spent 6 weeks online and found QAnon, and now they've turned it into a political party. So just in 6 weeks, a huge section of the really well-meaning kind of wellness communities in New Zealand are now QAnon people. This is pastel QAnon. It's spreading in all the wellness groups and things like that. The sort of yoga groups and stuff like that are going QAnon now. They don't know where it comes from. All they're hearing is save the children, because QAnon presents itself as a way, Trump is stopping all these child trafficking movements all over the world, and he's this hero. It's absolutely not. It's complete bullshit from beginning to end. But they get through to these mothers groups by telling them that children are under threat. And there is child trafficking. It's not that that's fake, that's true, but they are actually presenting it in a way that draws people into a cult. So they're taking a real issue and weaponizing it to turn these people into a cult that will then be part of the far right, the political far right. That is exactly what's happening. And it's happening in multiple countries right now. This is very disturbing. And I literally have to fight QAnon here in New Zealand on a daily basis in groups that are supposed to be promoting community and wellness and togetherness and all the sorts of things that we most want to promote. These groups are being polluted by QAnon believers. And there are people in these groups who are so far gone that they start talking about assassinating politicians and major public figures because QAnon has told them these people are pedophiles when they're absolutely not. So very dangerous things are happening. They've already tried to assassinate the Canadian Prime Minister, for instance. Somebody tried to ram raid through his front gates to kill him because they'd been told he was a pedophile by QAnon. They had a QAnon supporter some time ago, it was probably a couple of years ago, he'd been told about the Pizzagate conspiracy, which is where all this started. He actually went to the pizzeria in Washington, D.C. with his military-style weapons. They'd been told there was a basement where all these pedophiles were hanging out. He went to this door that had been told was the basement. He opened it, and it's a broom closet. And he says, oh, the intel on this was not 100%. It's like, no kidding. Of course, he's arrested. But people are doing things like this. They are committing crimes in the real world right now because they've been told that all sorts of people are sadistic, cannibalistic pedophiles. And I literally mean they think they're killing children to suck something out of their adrenal glands that they call adrenochrome that they think will keep them alive forever. Like, how crazy does this sound? They think there's immortality juice in the adrenal glands of children and that they're being trafficked around the world so that liberal elites can consume this life-extending elixir. This is absolute insanity. There is nothing, not a shred of truth in any of that. But this is what people are falling for, and they're becoming completely insulated from reality in doing so. So if you try to argue with them, you can't. You cannot have a discussion with these people. You can perfectly well discuss politics with a rational conservative. Or if you're a conservative, you can perfectly well discuss politics with a rational liberal. You know, as long as everybody's talking about the world of ideas, there shouldn't be a problem. But with the level of polarization that we've got, and the fact that those ideas are being driven behind very high walls, so they're no longer subject to discussion. They've become axiomatic. In other words, these are the things that people regard to be 100% true with a capital T, that they will not discuss and that they just completely and utterly believe. Both sides of the equation have those, but the middle is all going away. All the rational discussion is going away because more and more people are moving behind those walls on one side or the other. And that is a real shame. I mean, I've seen a lot of right-wingers call liberals, or, well, liberals and progressives, I've heard them call them NPCs, that non-player characters in D&D terms. But when you look at it, there are non-player characters at both ends of the spectrum. So most of them are on the far right. It's another form of projection. They're accusing the liberals of this. But who is it that's standing there chanting, lock her up, lock her up? These are the kind of things you do if you're a non-player character. You don't have your own ideas. You just chant mindless things, and you don't engage in any thinking process in relation to those things. So this is a problem because more and more people are disengaging from the thoughtfulness process. The process of going through ideas and actually analyzing and evaluating them and discussing them, bouncing them off other people's ideas to see what might work best. This is the way politics used to work and should work, but it's becoming absolutely hamstrung by people being so polarized that they're not prepared to discuss anything anymore. And that is just a huge problem. I don't see how you come back from that without violence, just because the level of hatred and the depth of belief in mutually exclusive things is so deep. It just makes me wonder how on earth you square that circle. And I honestly don't know, but Americans need to be watching this like a hawk right now. Like, this is probably the most important time in Americans' entire lives. So they need to watch what's going on, not get hoodwinked, vote in a way that makes their vote count if they possibly can. So what I tell people, vote as early as you can. Vote in person if you can. Properly protected, of course. You know, face mask, shield, whatever it takes. But if you vote in person, your vote is far more likely to count. You can vote early, though, so you're not having to stand in these long queues on election day. Many states allow you to vote early, so it's a lot less of a risk to vote in person if you're doing it early, because you're not in a huge press of a crowd, and you can protect yourself in whatever way you feel you need to. So do that if you can. If you can't do that, because either you are extremely immunologically compromised or someone in your family is, then vote by mail, but vote as early as you possibly can. There are ways to track your vote online. I don't specifically know how to access those. That's the sort of thing you tend to know if you're American. So I can't give you a link for how to check your vote in whatever different state. But those links are out there. They do exist. You could probably find them. And so people need to know that their vote was counted. So you want to put it in the mail as soon as you can if you're going to do it by mail, in the right envelope, in that little interior envelope. Get it in the mail as soon as you can so that it is definitely there before the election. It won't be enough for it to be postmarked before the election. It actually has to be physically there. And it may take 2 weeks to get there because of what they've done to the post office, even if you put a first-class stamp on it. So this is why you have to be early. These are the kind of things people need to know. If they do that, they will give themselves the best possible chance of not living under Trump as dictator for life. There's no guarantee at this point that that won't happen anyway, but this is the only way to prevent it. So that's absolutely what Americans need to do, because this won't solve all the problems. Just put, if Biden wins and ends up in power, that doesn't mean all the problems go away. You've still got 40% of the country that are flaming mad Trump supporters who are going to be even more angry now if their Messiah has just been kicked out of office and is now going to be prosecuted for his gazillion crimes. They are going to be very, very angry. There's a lot of damage that's been done to American institutions. All of them, because the people who were appointed to run them in this administration were appointed to destroy them from within. That was the game plan. Steve Bannon came out and explicitly said so. The point was to destroy the administrative state, and that's exactly what they've been doing for 4 years. So there's institutional memory that has been lost. The civil service has been politicized because they've been purged of anyone who didn't agree with Trump. They've literally gone around the civil service and fired anyone who wasn't prepared to declare personal loyalty to Donald Trump. So now they're going to be inheriting a hostile civil service, which they will have to remake. And it's very difficult to replace a culture of apolitical public service. That's the sort of thing that typically takes decades to build up. That sense that, of course, we're apolitical. We check our political beliefs at the door. We do our job in accordance with the rules as they're laid out. That's the way the civil service used to work. It doesn't work that way now. Trump has ruined that. And they're going to be facing a hostile judiciary. He's appointed a quarter of all the judges in the entire country in the last 3 and something years. So these are extremists. A lot of them are unqualified. Every single one of them is an extremist. They were all put forward by the Federalist Society. No one was appointed to the federal bench who wouldn't commit to destroying Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade is not just about abortions. It's about bodily autonomy in general. It's about refusing medical treatments that you do not consent to, for instance, or not having the state override your decisions about your own body. It's not just about abortion. It's much broader than that. Americans have no idea what this is going to do to them, and it's gone. Roe versus Wade is gone under this court. The ACA is gone under this court. And in fact, the ACA is gone even without Amy Coney Barrett, because if you have 8 justices, you're going to have, the best you could hope for is a tie. If Roberts votes with the liberals, you have a 4-4 tie on the ACA. A tied Supreme Court means the lower court ruling stands, and that is kill the ACA. So it's gone, it's toast. There's nothing anyone can do to prevent the ACA from being eliminated before the election. These are things that are happening that are monumental. They are going to change the fabric of society in America in ways that most Americans have no idea about and are going to hate. But by the time they realize it's happened, it's going to be too late. So one quote, I can't even remember who said it. I posted it on my Facebook page recently, but it was, "Hell is truth seen too late." And it is. It absolutely is. That things are being put in place that are going to have consequences down the line that are not going to be what people wanted at all. I mean, I don't think most Americans want to live in a fascist, theocratic, white nationalist ethno-state, but that's what they're going to be living in a few years if Trump isn't removed. And my concern is that even if Biden's elected, it's a temporary stay of execution, if you like. It's a last chance to try and get things sorted out so that that movement, which has been growing for decades, it's far before Trump, that movement towards a sort of enshrining one party rule, minority rule, white supremacy, Christian supremacy, that's been going on for a long time, that movement, sort of quietly under the radar mostly. But if it steps out from behind the curtain, then that will be fait accompli. That will be a transition right then and there, fully formed, stepping out from behind the curtain. And that's very much what will end up happening. But Biden might be able to change things if he gets into power. I don't know how long he'll end up being in power, because if shit hits the fan financially, almost anyone who wins is probably going to be thrown out in the middle of their term next time, because of what's going to happen financially. People will think, this person can't solve our problems. And this will be true because no human being is able to solve the problems that come with an economic depression. You simply have to live through it and get out the other side. No one can prevent you having a depression if one is on the cards. Whoever's the leader will be blamed for the depression. So it's not like Biden's going to get 4 years to sort things out. He's going to come into power. He's going to be fought at every stage by the civil service. He's going to be dealing with a violently polarized electorate, and he's going to be staring down the barrel of a Great Depression that there won't be anything he can do to prevent. So my concern is that things are going to get very sticky very quickly over the next couple of years. And even if Biden wins, the best scenario is for him to win, but that doesn't mean that everything goes back to normal and it's all fine. Not at all. This is still the beginning. It would just mean that you might get a couple of years to try and undo some of the damage before the depths of the depression hit. So I'm sorry if this all sounds really very depressing. I realize it does. But is it not better to know when something is about to happen to your country? Because then there might be some chance you can do something about it. I don't think ignorance is bliss. For me, it never ever has been. I cannot stand to not know. Even if it's bad, I have to know, because then I can position myself accordingly with whatever's happening. I may not be able to change it, but I can position myself in accordance with it so that it doesn't just steamroller me and my family and people like that. So being aware of what's going on allows you to do that, allows you to put yourself in a position where you're not as likely to be harmed, where you're not as exposed, and where you can draw people together. And this is all extremely important stuff. It's all the community building stuff that we've been talking about all this time. It's never been more important than it is now. It's just more difficult than it is now. And in some ways, I actually think in places they're using the pandemic to make that worse, because there are actually a lot of positive sort of errors in these COVID tests. You're getting false positives. So sometimes lockdown measures now are more severe than they need to be because of the false positives. So the cases are not as bad as they were. What you're getting the appearance of more cases because of the false positives. You're not getting more deaths. I think they should be basing the policy around the death rate rather than just the number of cases that they're finding. Either that, or they have to be a whole hell of a lot more careful with their tests. Because what they do with these tests, they multiply up the viral DNA to the point where they can detect it. And so you need to know, the number you need to know is how many times did they have to multiply it up before you could detect it. If they had to multiply it up 1 trillion times before they could detect it, you're not infectious. You will test positive, but you're not infectious. So this is a problem too. I think they're thinking, this pandemic seems to have allowed us to impose all these things on people. We'll just take that further than it would normally have been justified. So I'm absolutely for public health measures, but there has to be balance. And I think they need to be much clearer about these tests and how they're using those tests to justify public policy, because one of the problems with some of these measures is it will prevent people from forming community. It's preventing people from coming together in constructive ways. They're coming together to protest, which sometimes is constructive and sometimes not, but they're not able to come together in the most constructive ways. So I think we have to have a balance between public health measures and it's not just a matter of not killing the economy, it's not killing community. if you kill community and you just atomize everybody, then everybody is acutely vulnerable, because now you're all just a bunch of individuals confronting an enormous power structure. You need more of a balance of power than that, and the only way to have that is for people to come together. But they can't come together right now because they're not allowed. So this is another thing that we're going to have to deal with. I think people are going to have to find ways to maintain and build community despite the pandemic. Protect your health by all means, but don't give up on community, because community has never mattered more than it does now. So I hope I haven't totally depressed everybody.
Well, there was one other thing. You emailed me and you mentioned that the New York Times
oh yes,
revealed
I have
something
my
about Donald's taxes. And
yes.
there's been this whole question, you know, Donald, are you paying your taxes? Why aren't you revealing your taxes to us for a long time? And so did you want to tell us like the summary on that?
Yeah, so the New York Times published an enormous expose yesterday about Trump's taxes. So they have found the exact amounts of tax that he paid, not for the last 2 years, but for the 2 years before that. His total tax bill was $750. People were coming out and saying, my kid refereed soccer matches
Nicole,
for the summer.
Stop for a second. Stop for a second.
Uh-huh.
I could go grab my checkbook. I just sent the federal government last month over $1,000. Are you saying that I've paid more taxes
Yes.
than he has?
Yes.
I have.
And not just you, anyone who has a part-time minimum wage job. Anyone.
Well, in that $1,000 check, that was in addition to withholdings from myself and my wife, you know?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And he's paid less than that.
Yes. And for 10 to 15 years before that, he paid nothing at all. The way he does this, people think he's a good businessman. He generates staggering losses all the time and writes them off against any profits he makes. So he declares losses every single year and pays no tax. So A, he's a tax fraud, and B, he's the worst businessman ever. His losses are in the billions. He's lost more than anybody else. Now, the interesting thing is what the New York Times published is a best case scenario, because what they published is what Trump himself told the IRS. So this is him presenting his best self to the IRS. What Trump.org does is keeps two sets of books, the one for the IRS and the real books. So it's way worse than what the New York Times has put out. The New York Times has put out the best case scenario, and the worst case scenario is going to be vastly, vastly worse than that. But he's been a tax cheat for his entire life. He just doesn't pay. He considers people who pay taxes to be suckers and losers, the same as military people who die in battle. Did you catch that one, by the way, during your summer? I can't remember if we discussed that one before.
I remember something about that.
Yeah, so he was basically saying that soldiers who died in battle were suckers and losers. So this is one of the reasons that I think the military might just give him the giant middle finger, because I know a whole lot of extremely pissed off Marines who absolutely despise the ground that Trump has walked on, even if they've been Republicans all their lives, just because of what he said about the people they worked with who gave their lives for the country. So another wrinkle in terms of complications. But yeah, the tax issue is huge. He just doesn't pay. He's been a fraud his entire life. But if you look at the networks, most of the networks covered it to some extent. Fox News didn't say anything about it at all. They said Joe Biden might be fiddling his taxes, which he isn't. Joe Biden has released his taxes for decades, but they project all the time. Everything they're doing, they accuse the other side of doing. And because their side only watches Fox News and only sees propaganda, they're completely brainwashed. There just isn't a shared reality. That's a huge problem. There used to be in the past a shared reality people could connect to and have discussions around, but that's gone now because people live in two completely separate realities thanks to the Fox News ecosystem and Breitbart and all of that. They just do not inhabit the same reality. And that's a huge problem. How do you get back from that kind of polarization? Personally, I think Mike Bloomberg should buy Fox News and shut it down. He could afford to do that. That would be make the biggest difference.
Well, I did see that he was going to do an ad buy in Florida for like $100 million to help get Biden and the Democrats elected in Florida.
He also is helping to pay off the debts of Florida past felons, because there was a vote to allow the felons to be able to vote again, and it passed. And DeSantis said, well, only if you've paid off all your fines and debts and stuff. So it was basically disenfranchising them again. Bloomberg came along and said, I'll pay all their fines. And now the Attorney General in Florida has said, too bad, so sad, we're not letting you vote anyway. So that will disenfranchise enough people to give Florida to Trump, most likely. Again, I mean, it's ridiculous. But there are all these machinations. The devil is in the detail, and American elections are so much more complicated than anybody else's. Other elections, people just go and they vote and it's all fine. But the Electoral College is insanely complicated. And it has all these wrinkles and little details that most people are utterly unaware of because they've never mattered before. Because it's never been that controversial before that you had to go down into that level of detail. It's only now that we're going to find out that some of these constitutional provisions don't have anywhere near the specificity that you would need to actually be able to resolve this situation without it all just coming down to violence.
Yes, well, I will speak on behalf of a few of the viewers and say, this does sound kind of apocalyptic.
It probably sounds like it's coming right out of left field, that you wouldn't recognize any of it in your own life. And you probably sort of look around your garden going, what? But it doesn't make sense. Everything is pretty much normal. But this is exactly happening
one
underneath.
thing that you're saying that really rings kind of true to me is that, you know, I don't know if I've mentioned this to you, but I live in a red county and a red township, and it's really down to the townships, which are 6 miles by 6 miles, 10K by 10K. So, and if I drive around, there are many yard signs for Trump, you know, like every 20th house or so that you pass, there'll be a Trump sign. I'm not saying every house.
The Biden signs get removed and destroyed.
Well,
so that is exaggerated.
The only Biden signs I've seen have been like in the village on a side street at the end of a cul-de-sac. You know, actually one of them wasn't at the end of a cul-de-sac, but it was still clearly off the main drag, right? And out in the rural US, which technically I am in, you know, the number of pickup trucks, which are very common in the US, especially where there's farming going on, the number of pickup trucks, rusty pickup trucks, you know, ones that are like 20 or 30 years old, driven by people that afford vehicles of that type, that have 2 flags off the back where the tail lights are, you know, and there's the US flag. And yesterday, for the first time in a number of years, I saw one of these pickup trucks that had the two exhaust pipes for the coal smoke to come out the top. I don't know if you've ever heard of anything like that, but the Trump supporters, they are really, I mean, if you only lived here in this township, and then you saw the election votes and it was like, oh, Biden's up, or Trump's up. I mean, obviously he won. I mean, it wouldn't matter. I mean, I think I'm agreeing with your point that if 5 days later Michigan comes in and says, no, it wasn't actually Trump that won, it was Biden, you know, no one around here would believe that. Yeah.
That's exactly the thing, because rural America is almost entirely Trump country. They are going to see just a sea of Trump signs. Biden supporters don't want their houses to get egged and bricks thrown through their windows and things. So not all of them put out signs. Some of them who do get their signs trashed very regularly. The signs I like are the ones that say, any functioning adult 2020, because that's really what you need. I mean, I would literally, if I was American, I'd vote for a ham sandwich over Trump, because at least the ham sandwich wouldn't try and nuke some random country. Which is entirely possible in the Trump way of seeing things. But yes, people are going to be surprised when he wins. It's the suburbs and the inner cities that are the Biden country. So the Trump supporters who are only seeing Trump signs everywhere, of course they're going to think he's going to win. It's unfortunate, but impressions are created and they're not always true.
I had to, my son just came in, so I had to give him a little.
That's fine.
Well, I think we should wrap up so the viewers, the listeners can get on with their days and make sure to fill out their ballots.
Mm-hmm.
So I got my ballot today, and there it is, and I'm going to make sure to follow the directions on the back. And
check the inner envelope. It has to go in the inner envelope.
In the inner envelope, right. So I could open that up now, but I'll just keep it right here, ready to go.
The other thing people might need to know is, I don't know about Michigan, but some ballots are being sent out in those large envelopes, but they're covered with Trump propaganda. So they look like a Trump mailer. But it's actually the ballot. People might throw them away without even realizing that that was their ballot. So you're not supposed to do that, of course, but since when has he ever cared about rules like that?
Well, and you said something about Trump had mentioned that people should try to vote multiple times. So
yes, he told
technically I could take this and put it in the mail the Saturday before Election Day or the Friday before Election Day. And then I could show up at the polls on Election Day and vote. And so my ballot would be counted just that moment. But then it's up to the clerk, to make sure that when they open this later that evening or the next day, that they don't put it through the machine again, because they got to check.
Yeah.
Right? They've got to double check, because your name's got to be signed and everything. There's a list. Did you vote or not?
So he's telling his voters to vote twice. He's telling them to commit a felony. He doesn't care if they go to jail because of that. He just wants to win the election. But the point is, he wants to create voter fraud because he wants to complain about voter fraud. It doesn't matter who did the fraud. He will just say there was fraud. And even if he's the one who created the fraud, he will say there is fraud, so these election results must be thrown out. This is the kind of just brazen stuff that he's doing. Just absolutely coming out there, lying through his teeth about everything, all the time. You cannot believe a single word out of his mouth. But he's very good at lying in a way that makes people believe him.
I guess one thing we're going to be able to find out, especially for the viewers who are watching this after the election and in, beyond 2020.
Yeah, they'll get to see whether it played out this way.
How accurate is this perception from outside the U.S. that the U.S. has a real mess on its hands?
Yeah.
I mean, it feels, it can be easy not to notice what's going on beyond your own household. It can be really easy.
Yep. Especially when it's summer and it's nice outside. There are other things to be thinking about.
Yes.
It's not just the US that's going to have a problem. And Canada's drifting to the right as well. Nowhere near as far, but we have Doug Ford in Ontario. He's not the Prime Minister. He's the Premier of Ontario. But he's pretty close to Trump. His family business was drug dealing, so he sort of comes from the same kind of dodgy background that Trump comes from. He's not a mafia guy as far as I know, but he's an extremist conservative with a very dodgy background who sympathizes with Trump on an awful lot of things. So there are going to be problems elsewhere too. The right is rising in Europe. There are people here, Australia as well. Australia is more authoritarian than here. But yeah, it's going to be a problem everywhere. It's just not everywhere has nuclear weapons. So not everywhere has the ability to inflict their problems on everywhere else.
Well, hopefully in one of our future episodes, we'll be able to focus more on what to do now. I mean, and we have in a lot of the past episodes. So if you're watching
Yep.
this, look up some of the earlier stuff, like from 2020, March, April, May time, because we talked a lot about solutions and how to work with community. And Nicole has had on a few guests recently, and we've talked about how to build a community and those sorts
We
of
must
things.
be up to 40 hours worth of discussions by now. So there's going to be something in there for everybody.
Right. So yeah, don't take, I take seriously what Nicole has to say and her perspective on things, but there's also the solution side, which is trying to build community where you are with
Oh,
those who
yes.
are actually physically around you.
Yes.
So all right, well, thank you so much, Nicole, for all your time today, and
You're
thank you
welcome.
for all the viewers for hanging out with us. If you like this video, please like and subscribe and put in a comment, and we will see you next time.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.